Happy Wednesday. I want to do a quick follow-up on the video I just posted about talking to Linda about pinning on the top of her quilt, or anyone that's not pinning, stitching it down. I don't pin them anymore. I just stitch them. It's not a basting stitch. I just stitch across the top because I'm not going to take it out. But I wanted to follow up with a note when I was just talking to Linda that I should mention. So I'm going to pretend that it's there, and I'm going to turn the phone around so I can show you, because I don't think most people think about this, and it makes a huge difference. So let's say we have a quilt that's got a lot of piecing. I mean, just a ton of piecing, like this one on the wall over here. And let's say that quilt had, by the way, this was pieced by Marilyn Badger a long time ago. So let's say this quilt, or any quilt, has a lot of piecing in it. And then you come out here. I wish I had a quilt that I could show you this on. I'll fake it. So then you've got a lot of piecing in here. I mean, really, really tight piecing. Then you've got this big old border out here, or two or three, that have no piecing. Let's say you have a 8-inch border, or you have mini borders. And the quilt is nice and flat. You've laid it out, you looked at it, you know it's good. So you put this quilt on, you seam across the top, and as you start rolling the quilt, all of a sudden you've got all this extra fabric here. And I can't really show you on this quilt because this quilt is flat and square. But as you start rolling down, and let's say both of these are borders. Now this is a t-shirt quilt, so this is not a border. But let's say this were a border and this were a border, and I have another border, or just a big border. As I start rolling this quilt on, all of a sudden, this part of the quilt is nice and tightly rolled, normally, and getting thicker. And all of a sudden, it's rolling up, and you've got 2 inches of fabric out here in this border. It's like, where did it come from? And you want to push it down and tuck it down. So then you can keep just like tucking it down like this and rolling it up. And I've got a little bit of that going on here because this is a border. This is a t-shirt quilt. T-shirts are thick. It's got the sashings or the fusible on the back. It's got seams. It's got paint. So as you're quilting, as you're rolling on this big, heavy pieced quilt, and it doesn't have to be big, it's just got a lot of piecing, and you've got this big wide border with nothing. As you roll this on, this border is going to appear like it's too big. It isn't. It's because this is rolling on 2 or 3 times thicker than your border that has no piecing in it, because it's 2 or 3 times thicker than this. So if you run into this, you want to leave any fullness that you think is fullness. It's really not. Leave it right there. And be careful as you're rolling it, leave it right there. But as you unroll it, this is going to be flat, because this is flat. And the only fullness, don't push it down in here. Just let it build up. So this may be really wonky and big. I mean, sometimes I've have a couple of inches in here because of how tight the quilt rolled on. So as you advance the quilt, this will unroll, so this is perfectly flat. Then you can stitch down your sides and continue on. And when you get to the bottom, you don't have a quilt that's all pushed into the middle because you thought those borders were too big when they really weren't. So if you push them down, you're distorting your quilt, number one. And then when you get to the bottom, guess what? You do have an issue, because that bottom border, because you've moved it around so much thinking that it's too big, you've created an issue at the bottom of the quilt. I hope this makes sense. And when I have a quilt that I have to put on that has a big border like that with heavy piecing, I can show it again. And someone asked about me showing a quilt that has big blocks and what I do with it. Without really having a quilt that has big blocks, I really can't show you that. But let me just say this. I'll turn myself around here. If you have a quilt that has, it's quilting along just fine, and you've got a quilt that one of the blocks has 2 inches of fullness in it. Like, you know, it just puffs up. You do not want to do what I'm about to tell you. If that block is full, leave all of that fullness right in that block. If you go in and you start doing this, so let's say we've got 2 inches of fabric in here, and you go in and you start smoothing it out and smoothing it out, and now that block is nice and flat. Where did that fabric go? It went over here. Now you've got 2 inches of fabric over here. You've got a crooked seam line. You've got a crooked seam line out here. And the eyes are instantly going to go to that crooked seam line. So if you leave that fullness in this 2 inches of fullness in this block, guess what? You've still got 2 inches of fullness in this block, but you can figure out how to maneuver it and get that fullness either laid down or quilted out, or maneuver it around if you're doing an edge to edge or using a computerized system. You can kind of watch it and manage it so the rest of the quilt is still perfectly flat, and this block, they're not going to notice the fullness in there, and they're not going to see this all messed up because you pushed that fullness out. So if you have fullness in a quilt, leave the fullness where it lives. That's where it originated. That's where it needs to stay. Was that so confusing? If it was, kind of think about it. And kind of think about what I said with initially when I was just talking to Linda about the thickness of the quilt rolling in there, and then you've got this big she said she had an 8-inch border. Well, she's got thickness in the quilt, and then she's got a big 8-inch border. There's nothing in it. So I think that's where her problem was coming from. If you have any questions, give me a call or send me a message, or you can post it on here. Have a good day.